All right. I just wanted to do a quick intro. Thanks for joining us, Kay, Jenny, Juan, Jan. I appreciate you and everyone who will be watching this later. We are just honored to have Lynette Mock here. She's a member outreach specialist at Main Street Organization of Realtors. For those of you who are more members or are using the more contracts, there have been some changes made to them. And so Lynette's come today to kind of walk us through that. And thank you so much for coming and spending your time with us. I appreciate it. I will let you take over.
All right, great. Thank you so much. And thanks for having me this morning. So our broker lawyer committee has been extremely busy these last several months, and they were able to finally get some changes done that has been a laundry list for not only members, but for them, the committee. So I'll just kind of get started and work our way through. If you have any questions, you can either add them into the chat. Let me try to open up the chat box so that I have it up so that way I can glance over and see it. Or you can interrupt me. That's totally fine too.
I'll watch it for you.
And, thank you so much.
Yeah,
I appreciate it. It's so difficult sometimes. You get busy presenting and then you kind of.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, so the first one that we're going to talk about is the exclusive right to sell marketing agreement. I believe Keller Williams may have their own marketing agreement and may not use Main Street's, but you should be aware of the changes. I do know that some brokerages who have their own, they are investigating potentially updating their own marketing agreements just to match or to be similar, so that they're staying in license law and in some of the upcoming things that I'll talk about.
So we actually do use the standard forms here.
Oh, so. You do?
Yes.
Oh, perfect. Perfect then. So the marketing agreement, paragraph 2 was just a quick, easy change. All we did was add arrest record and pregnancy to the protected classes. And this was based on license law. So we just updated based on Illinois state law. And that's just a quick change there, not really a big thing. However,
so just to cover quickly, so these are protected classes. So this would be a fair housing issue, fair housing content here. And so you added 2 protected classes.
Correct, 100%.
Great.
Okay. So paragraph 9 is actually a brand new paragraph. It's seller duties. So in the past, based on license law and the previous marketing agreements, it's a mutual binding contract. We get sellers all the time calling the association and they're asking, how do I get out of this marketing agreement? I just want out. I want to fire my agent, And we explained that it's a mutual binding contract, that you just can't fire your agent, that they should consult with their attorney. And, we give them some other direction in regards to contacting the managing broker and so on. But that also goes for you. As a realtor, it sometimes is hard to fire a seller, right? Who may not be doing certain duties that you have asked of them. So what the broker lawyer committee did was add a seller duty paragraph that now explains to the seller their responsibilities. So if they aren't following these responsibilities, now there may be an out for you to go ahead and get out of that contract. But the most important thing I really wanted to talk about were lines 118 through lines 121. And that is that now the seller must either check yes or no and initial on whether or not they want recordings, so video and photos taken inside their properties from the buy side, the buyer's agent, so on and so forth. So it's up to the seller. So we have gotten lots of comments and questions in the past, especially from sellers. They might see a photo out on social media. It doesn't have their address, but it might have a photo of like a basement and it says, look at this creepy basement. I looked at today, blah, blah, blah. Seller gets upset. So the seller now can say yes or no. So this is really important for the buyer's agent. As the buyer's agent, it's very important if you think that your buyers are going to record or want to take photos, which is usually the norm, you need to have permission. So it's important to either send a quick text or a email just to confirm. So we're getting the question, is there going to be a checkbox in Connect MLS when a listing is being uploaded that the listing agent can check yes or no in regards to this? Currently, there's not. That's not to say that there won't ever be. I know that we have recommended they make that change. You can always call the help desk, and that helps push it along when they start getting a lot of phone calls in regards to that. And the other question I get is like, well, what do we do in the meantime? Again, as a listing agent, you can put it in agent remarks. It's not required. It's up to the buyer's agent to confirm whether they can or can't based on the listing agreement. Okay.
Can I ask just a clarifying question on that? That's great to know. This would be taking photos or videos at all, not necessarily taking videos or photos and sharing them like on social media.
Correct. This is it for anything, correct. So I sometimes get the question about FaceTime. You know, FaceTime, it doesn't get saved. There's no actual recordings or anything being taken. It's probably gray area. It's probably acceptable. It's when they're actually taking the photos. But again, right, they could be taking it just to show, you know, somebody who wasn't able to attend with them. But they have to have the seller's permission.
So would it maybe be best practice for our listing agents if their sellers have said, no, I don't want photos, to maybe make that prominent in the property, like put up a sign or, you know, leave something along with their notes.
Sure.
Say,
okay. Yeah, and they can also add to seller remarks until that box is added from the MLS. But again, it is on the buyer's agent. So now that it's in the marketing agreement and there's things going on, there's a potential someone may be wanting to file a complaint. So just being aware of that, that has been added. Okay.
Is there a fine associated with that at this point, or is it just more like an ethics complaint?
Right, that someone could file a potential ethics complaint.
Okay.
And it would depend, it would go through the hearing process.
Okay.
So paragraph 10, also new, notice of regard of buyer love letters or offer letters. NAR for the last several months, probably the last year, has sent out many blogs and videos and webinars, and they are telling their 1.5 million realtors that they are recommending that sellers do not accept buyer love letters. It does offer open them up to a potential claim of discrimination, so fair housing. You know, I know in these last several months when buyers are doing anything and everything to get their property, you know, obviously get their contract under, they do pretty much anything, and that includes maybe buyer love letters. But as a seller, when they're accepting them, you know, for example, you know, you could receive, let's say 10 contracts, 5 of them have a letter or video with photos, you know, and they're all beautiful families, you know, they're all different types of families, and a seller accepts one over the other. Someone else finds out and they think they were discriminated against based on maybe, you know, the makeup of that family, or, you know, their culture or their color, whatever it is. So again, sellers need to understand when accepting that there is a potential opportunity that they may get a claim filed against them. So it's, some offices are taking the stance we're not accepting them across the board, but the seller does have the opportunity to say yes or no. The reason for this paragraph really is to protect you, the realtor, so that a seller will understand what they are, what it means for them to accept them. And if they continue to accept them, and let's say something does get filed down the road, you're kind of out of the situation now, because you did explain to them it is in your listing agreements. And the other question I get is, okay, so the seller's not accepting them. I've selected no. It's currently not in the listing agreement that they are or aren't. You could add it into the seller remarks. The other thing is that if you were to get one in, you could always just, you know, toss it, but you could let that buyer's agent know that the seller has said, look, I'm not accepting them. I shredded it. We didn't read it. It didn't go to the sellers, but I am going to, of course, you know, present your offer. So just letting them know that you know, that you're not accepting them. So again, seller in the driver's seat, they can decide whether or not they want to accept those buyer love letters.
So if you're okay, I would just like to pause for a minute because I actually had one of our agents call me a week or two ago about this paragraph particularly. And I just want to kind of provide a little more explanation because she wasn't quite sure. So for those of you watching later or on now, what they're calling a buyer offer letter, love letter, is that letter that says, hi, we love your house so much. and you should pick us because here's all of the reasons and we're amazing, and right, all of those things, that all of the tricks that we're trying to do to make our buyers stand out in a pack of, potentially many buyers, at least in the last year or so, we've had that experience. So it's that letter that those buyers can sort of very easily provide information about themselves that could lead to discrimination. So I've been talking about this for a number of years, actually, and I'm glad to see, and I know things take time to get where they're going, and I'm glad to see that in this particular contract. Those love letters, right? The buyer can put themselves in a position to be discriminated against, and it puts your seller in a position to potentially discriminate against somebody. And it also puts you in the middle of all of that, right? So you might then have to have a conversation with your seller or your buyer about fair housing and what you can and can't do with regards to accepting an offer. But it removes a whole lot of liability from your shoulders and the brokerage's shoulders when these love letters aren't passed along. Certainly, probably some sort of communication could happen. I would tell you to, filter it through you, don't just let a buyer, write a letter. And now we have this option, right? You can explain this to your seller. You can choose not to, they can choose not to accept those or to accept them. And, then kind of some of that liability transfers to them at that point. What I would, I think, like to, point out here is that with these love letters, it's just really important to have that conversation up front with your buyers, and your sellers, so that you're not in the way. We've certainly had to end contracts with some of our listing agents, with some of our sellers because they've wanted to discriminate in the past. It's just not a conversation you really ever want to get into. And this is, I think, probably one of the greatest ways that you get into this sort of situation. So any questions on that? Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, one more thing. Make sure whatever you're doing that you treat everyone the same. So if you're accepting love letters for your seller, you have to accept everyone's love letters and hand them over because you then don't want to be a part of that discrimination. If you are not accepting love letters, then you don't accept them from anyone. So just make sure you're treating everybody the same.
Now I have a question on that.
Yeah.
So are these letters coming initially when they're submitting their initial contract to put in their offer? So these are usually when you're having several offers coming in at from several different individuals. And basically because some of this information may not be specific as to who they are or what they're about, but it may be something about their contract in itself, so is this initially given out in the beginning when you're presenting a contract to the listing agent?
Yeah, so typically that's when a buyer letter, a love letter is presented. It's usually as they submit a offer to purchase to the listing agent. It would just be a letter written. Sometimes they're written by the agent, sometimes they're written by the buyer, and provided with whatever documentation, the contract and disclosures that you're sending over. It should not be anything that contains anything regarding the offer itself. That should all be on the standard forms and contracts.
So adding on to that question, when you're having these conversations with your initial buyers and your sellers, you can let them know that basically the forms that have to be presented are contracts. It can't be any personal information. So that way you can avoid getting yourself into this dispute, discriminating on either side.
So it's your seller's choice. And now
Okay.
that conversation's been made easier. A lot of us have been having that conversation for a long time. The conversation is made easier with this contract now. The pros and cons are sort of stated, and the seller gets to make a decision about that.
Okay, I get it.
Yeah,
Thank you for allowing me to ask.
of course. I think we're good.
All right, so then we'll move on. Paragraph 16, cooperation and compensation involving non-participants. So the reason for this change was, I don't know if any of you were reading or have been paying attention to the DOJ and the NAR lawsuit, and then they came into a settlement. 3 things came out of that settlement that needed to be fixed. Then the DOJ decided to pull out of that settlement. They're going to refile a lawsuit against NAR because they have some additional concerns. We don't know what those additional concerns are. However, we do know that the 3 things that they settled on will most definitely be back inside that lawsuit. So Main Street, MRED, we've all made the decision to go ahead and make the changes necessary that came out of that original settlement that was recently broken. So the 3 things that came out of that settlement are: 1, as a Realtor, you cannot advertise your services as free. Okay, even as a buyer's agent, you can't say, "Oh, you come work for me, with me," and because you're not going to pay me. It's free. The listing or the seller's going to pay. That's not a true statement. The buyers they're the ones that are coming in, getting that huge loan. They're the ones that are going to be paying for it the next, 15 to 30 years. So that's not a fair statement. The Code of Ethics has been updated to include that verbiage that you cannot offer your services as free. The second thing that came out of it was that the co-op compensation would be pushed to public sites. So in the past, when there was a co-op compensation, whatever ABC was, I'm not going to get into numbers, right? It's antitrust. It would just be stuck in the MLS, and it would be under the private section, right? In the agent section. Now, based on that settlement, I say loosely because it's going to get refiled. MRED has allowed brokerages to turn that on. You can now start pushing out the co-op compensation agreement to the public sites. So you may have already started seeing them. I know some brokerages have already started doing it. You can start seeing on Zillow, for example, or wherever that you can see that co-op compensation. So that was the second thing, sorry. And the third thing is that we needed to provide access to non-MLS participants to the properties. We already did that based on Central Lock. We have 1-day codes. It's easy to access properties. However, we wanted to make sure our contracts were updated and that the sellers understood the difference between a non-MLS participant and an MLS participant. So on lines 175, 176, the seller will need to, and 174, they'll need to check yes or no, an initial, on whether or not they are going to permit an Illinois licensee to enter their properties. And you're probably wondering, well, wait, why is this question even there? What am I going to say to my sellers? Well, I don't understand. We want to sell the property. Sellers need to understand that non-MLS participants are not realtors. You have to be part of a local, state, and national association, right, to have access to the MLS in Illinois currently. So a non-MLS participant is not held to the Code of Ethics. So if something happens inside that property with the licensee, or they provide a 1-day code to their buyers, you would not be able to file a Code of Ethics violation with the association. You would have to go to IDFPR, and now it has to be determined whether or not it's even a license law violation, whatever that issue happened, whatever the issue was that happened inside the property. As we know, license law is detailed, but in some retrospects, the Code of Ethics is just so much more detailed in regards to the realtor, brand and who you are and how you're professional in the industry. So it's important that sellers understand that. That doesn't mean to say that they should not permit them to, be there. They might make stipulations on that property. Well, then fine, I want you to attend, whatever. That's up to them. They're in the driver's seat, but they need to be made aware of that. So that is the change there. We have now added that in regards to those settlements. So in that DOJ refiles a lawsuit and whatever those things, those issues that come out of that, we know those 3 things, we will be ready to go in the future. So we went full steam ahead on that. Any questions?
No questions for me.
Great. All right, paragraph 18 is the last paragraph that was updated. It's just a cleanup. It is a, all we did was add the VOW. It used to just reference IDX. It's still the same paragraph. It's still, you know, you walk through your sellers in regards to where they want their information displayed on the internet. That didn't really change. Again, just to clean up there. Okay, so that's the marketing agreement. It is available in Connect MLS, Main Street, DocuSign, Dotloop, SkySlow. Zip Forms is still working on their updates to autofill. And I think there might be one more, but I apologize, I can't remember. So it should have the revision of June of 2021. What's important to note is if you are using Connect MLS and you have a bunch of folders set up in there, these forms that we're talking about today will not automatically update in your personal folders inside the MLS. They will only be found in the library under Main Street. So you will want to make sure that you delete your old forms and you move these ones into your folders from the library in Connect MLS. Okay.
This is going to be the same for everyone here at Keller Williams One Chicago in your DocuSign folders. If you have saved templates that you've saved personally, you're going to need to update those. I always recommend that you use the shared templates within the office. They're going to be the most up-to-date documents. Things sometimes, you know, change mid-year, and if you're not paying attention, and I know we've all been really, really busy this year, you have the potential to miss something and you know, get in a sticky situation. So make sure you're always looking at the shared templates from the office in DocuSign.
So the next form is waiver, professional home inspection, and radon. Informed consent. We've always had this form, but it was only home inspection. They recently added radon to it. So there's both paragraphs. You can, you know, your buyers can select one or the other or both. The reason for this change is that people were getting tired of using two forms. But the most important thing is whether or not you use Keller Williams or you use this form. The importance of this form, especially in these last several months, again, going back to when buyers are doing anything and everything to get those properties, a lot of them are waiving home inspections. But as realtors, we know the importance of a home inspection. We know that if they don't get a home inspection in a few months down the road, things start happening, they're going to be calling you and upset. They're finding out their home warranties aren't covering that stuff and so on and so forth. It becomes quite, you know, the ordeal. In DuPage County several years ago, I know that a buyer had sued a brokerage because they had waived, and they said that they were never notified the importance of a home inspection and so on, and that buyer did win. The brokerage did have to pay out. So this form is really just a form between you, the buyer's agent, and your buyers. If your buyer is saying, look, I want to waive home inspections or radon, we highly, highly recommend that you use this form or another form at your office that's similar, so that way the buyers can't come back and say, well, you didn't tell me I needed to. Oh my gosh, I have, you know, $10,000 worth of, you know, things I have to fix and so on and so forth. So FYI on that, that's been updated. Take a look at that. If you need to use it, please do so, or use Keller Williams. Brokerage to brokerage cooperating compensation agreements. So this form was updated. It was updated again because of that DOJ and NAR lawsuit. This form could be used in two different ways. One could be that the buyer's agent and the listing agent have determined that they want to change the co-op compensation inside the MLS. So when they want to do that, they're going to use this form, and that way it is not an executable form unless both managing brokers have agreed to it. The brokers are not the ones who actually execute this form. It is the designated managing brokers. Okay. So that was one way you would use it. The other way would be is if a non-MLS participant, because now, you know, they're going to start seeing those co-op compensations, and I'm going to talk about that for just a second, but this form could also be used in that case too. It does now specify that the non-MLS participant would have to mediate and arbitrate to the association's policies, which is great for you. In the past, that wasn't possible, that wasn't in here, and you'd have to go to court, you'd have filing fees, and you would have attorney fees, and you would have a lengthy potential time to get, this settled, whereas at the association, it's pretty quick. It's $250 filing fee. If you mediate and you settle, you get that filing fee back. But briefly, I just want to talk about the change of the co-op compensation now being pushed to the public sites. So I know everyone doesn't really like to talk about Zillow that much, but I'm going to use them because they're obviously the biggest, right? And it makes sense to just kind of focus in on them, even though they are considered now brokerage. So if a non-MLS participant is looking at a property 123 Main Street and they see that there's a co-op compensation of ABC, and they then call you up and they say, oh, I would like to show this property, and then they show it, then they bring a contract on, it closes. And this is all they've done. And then they say, wait, where's my check? And you're like, what check? Because if they don't have a co-op compensation agreement in place, there is no payment, right? We get at the association between 8 and 10 calls a year from someone who doesn't understand why they're not being paid. And when we explain this, they're like, well, I didn't have a compensation agreement. That would be why. The other thing is that I get a lot of questions, so we just want to be point blank at this. We think that there may be some confusion in the future for non-MLS participants when they see those co-op compensation, because they might think that one, it's an automatic payment, which that's not the case. And two, they may think that that's what you're going to agree to pay them, even if you have a compensation. Just because someone comes to you and says, okay, now let's look at it as I'm a non-MLS participant. I call you up, I seen you're offering ABC to those that are MLS participants, right? And you say, okay, I want to show the property. But before I do, I want to do a compensation agreement. And then they start negotiating. They're like, well, I see you're offering ABC. And then, but you say, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to pay out ABC. You could charge XYZ. Remember, a non-MLS participant does not have access to your forms and contracts and other tools that you may have. So if that's the case, the other thing to note is that you're going to probably be doing more work, right? So you could potentially. So if these things are coming in, you have questions, I'm highly recommending you talk to your managing broker. It's very important that you're having those conversations with your managing broker, especially when we think there may be some confusion in the future in regards to now seeing that number. Okay.
I just want to kind of step back there a little bit because some of the folks on screen may not understand some of that particular language. So a non-MLS participant. So we're talking about somebody who does not have access to the MLS. The MLS was created primarily for brokerages to have one place where they came together to agree on compensation. So instead of you having to contact me every time you want to do a deal with another brokerage, and me reaching out and saying, hey, will you pay our agent, XYZ% on this, purchase? That all happens within the MLS. Because I'm a member of the MLS, you all have to also be members of the MLS. However, there are agents, real estate agents that are not Realtor members. They're not a member of any of the local boards or the national or the state association. How did they do business? I don't know. And they do exist, right? This could also cover, your auntie from Bloomington, Illinois, who's a Realtor member in an MLS in Bloomington, but not a member of our MLS here. And they may be helping their, niece or nephew or whatever, purchase a place here in Chicago. That person, if they're not a member of our local boards, is not a member of our MLS. So now they are a non-participant, non-MLS participant. What that means is they're licensed in Illinois. They practice in Bloomington, Illinois. They're just not a member here. Because they're not a member here, their broker's not a member here with our MLS. They're not a part of the compensation or brokerage agreement to pay each other. And so that's how that happens. Just a little background there. So that's how you end up with somebody who's not an MLS participant potentially doing business. You can go do business anywhere in the state as long as you have the right agreements in place and as long as your managing broker says it's okay. That's a whole different story. And it's generally not advisable to do that. But that's how, just so you have a little background on why we have the MLS and why somebody might not be a member that shows up. So this is great. This will make my life easier here as well. So
Great. Great. So that's the change there. And again, if it's a FSBO, we do have a separate agreement for that, and it is in parentheses. So you know that that's a for sale by owner. Okay. This is just brokerage. That was just brokerage to brokerage. The next couple of forms are just a cleanup. They're not for brokers. They're for the brokerages. This is certification of disbursement of escrow and the notification of intent. These are for brokerages who hold escrow and they're trying to get escrow off of their books within that 14-day period, as the contract does allow for that. Most brokerages don't use these forms, but they are available. There's a tutorial with them. It does just, all we changed was it references a 7.0 in the updated License Law Act. Most use other ways to get the escrow money off their books, but if you need them, they are there. Okay.
great.
So private listing network addendum. You guys are probably gonna laugh when I mention this, but you'd be surprised how many conversations we have with people that this is still happening. So this is addendum. Addendum usually means what? There's something before it. If you're going to use the private listing network addendum, you must have a signed listing agreement. Let that sink in. You're probably thinking, what? Well, of course, I'm going to sign listing
Happens.
agreement, right?
Yep.
But surprisingly, more times than you think, somebody is getting the private listing network addendum signed and not a listing agreement. So that's one important thing to know. The other thing that we really talked about was we just updated and cleaned up some verbiage. MRED does not require a private listing network addendum to be signed to put a property into the private listing network. Now at Main Street, we are highly recommending to all of our Realtor members that you use it. And I'm going to explain why. As a seller, and we get a lot of phone calls from sellers and from consumers, and they're all different, but sometimes it has to relate to the private listing network. A lot of times, especially if someone's not using this form. And that's because sellers, if you're not using the form, they will not understand what the private listing network is. They don't understand that their listing is being limited, that it's not getting full exposure. They don't understand the amount of time it's being housed in there, or maybe there's not certain things that are being, shown, or so on and so forth. This form is very specific. It goes into details of what the private listing network is to have with your sellers. This again is a risk reduction form for you as a realtor, because if you're walking your sellers through this, they understand what it is. We're not going to get the calls at the association of upset sellers that can't figure out how their home has been on the market for XYZ amount of days and their neighbor just sold and their home is nicer and it has some more upgrades or whatever. Their home is in the private listing network. They're like, I don't understand what the private listing network is. I don't understand why it was there. They're so upset, and it could potentially open you up for a lawsuit. So while it's not required by MRED, which MRED has highly recommended MRED to add this as a mandate, we're encouraging all of you to use it. But again, follow your office policy. Obviously, we can't dictate what you use, but we are just giving you the recommendations. Okay.
As the designated managing broker here, I do require a private listing network addendum with any listings that you intend to put in the PLN. And if you will get notification from the compliance department if we audit the MLS every morning. If you don't have the appropriate paperwork, you will get one of those little love notes from the compliance team asking you to get that signed and imported into your opportunity. So
Love it. That's awesome. Love it. That's the first office so far that has said they mandate it. So thank you. Yeah, Main Street has a mobile home sales contract. Bet you didn't know that, right? But we do. We've had it for many years. If you need it, it's there. All we did was we changed, it used to mention real estate, where a mobile home is not real estate, it's property. So we did change that description and we added an as is paragraph. So if you need one, we have one for you.
And I'm going to tell you, if you need one, you need to come talk to me so we can discuss that before it actually happens.
Perfect. Confidentiality agreement, we did create one. This is probably not going to be used for your everyday buyer. But if you have a high-end luxury property or you have a famous, buyer, they may not want their identities or their offer disclosed. You would use this form. So just an FYI there. Intent to escalate. So this is actually a really important form. So over the last year, I don't know, 6 to 9 months, if you were to speak to an attorney, because I spoke to many, they would say that it is extremely rare for them not to receive a sales contract that had some type of verbiage written in somewhere. It may not even be in the same place every time. Like they said they could be working on 5 different accounts and they probably all have 5 different amount of verbiage, and they also have it in different places. And what's happening is that, especially if it's if you're using a transaction management system, you guys are probably inserting a text box and you're having your buyers write in something to the effect of, I'm willing to go $500 over highest and best, whatever.
Yeah, we actually
language is
have
multiple,
an
right?
internal escalation form, and I look forward to seeing what yours, we might need to update ours.
So we have created an intent to escalate form. I was gonna say, please don't do that. So again, as realtors, we are never to change contracts. It's always the buyers. So if you're giving them verbiage, or if you're writing it in for them and having them initial or whatever, you're opening their door. And I'm sure you're a managing broker. You guys, I'm impressed with this office. I think you guys are probably not doing any of those things. But we've created an intent to escalate form. It's of course not meant to be binding, but it does do the same things that you would do if you were trying to put that verbiage in a sales contract. So it sounds like you guys have one. But you're more than welcome to use this one if you choose so. The one question though, surprisingly, that we have been getting over the last few months is not been from the buy side. It's actually been from the list side. So sellers, I've been to some offices, they said, yeah, this is 100% true. Their sellers sometimes would receive in so many contracts, and out of those contracts, 8 to 10 of them would have an escalation clause. And it was overwhelming. It's like, how do I even know which one to even start focusing on? Which one do I go through? And we just said, look, go back to their attorney and have them flush out each of the offers. I also get the question, well, can my seller just say, look, I don't want to accept any escalate forms? Of course, you're 100% able to do that. If the seller's always in the driver's seat. So if your seller's saying, look, it's confusing, I don't want them, of course they can say that. Okay. And yeah, of course, by all means, take a look at the form. And if you need to make some changes, by all means.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, so this is actually the biggest change. This is actually definitely affects you guys right in Cook County. So Main Street now has 3 leases that are available. The first one is obviously the regular normal Main Street lease that you would use in DuPage, Will, Lake County, wherever. We also have CARS, the City of Chicago's lease. It's only available if you're a Main Street member. You would not be able to find it in Connect MLS. You would have to go to Main Street's website and click on residential lease, and it's all the way to the bottom. We've always had it. And now we've created a Cook County residential lease. So this lease is meant to be used only in suburban Cook County. It's not to be used in the City of Chicago. It's not to be used in Evanston or Mount Prospect, as they have their own ordinances. So hopefully all of you are well aware of the residential tenant landlord ordinance that went into effect in June. If you haven't, there is information on our website on Illinois Realtors, and you can also Google, and Cook County has a lot of information. So these documents, we also have created videos. They will be up next week. They are just about done. They're in editing process. So you can always use those to reference because I'm not going to, those videos will go into detail every step. I'm only going to give you the overall. Okay. So when you download the Cook County residential lease, you will see that it's 25 pages. Don't be alarmed. We wanted to make sure that anything that you may possibly need was in one place, so that you were following this new ordinance and that your landlords and your tenants would understand what that ordinance really means. So the first couple pages of the lease is really a kind of a checklist. It walks through the RTLO and those pieces of what you may or may not need for the lease. It talks about the 60-day notice. It talks about security deposits and utilities and disclosures and so on and so forth, all in the first couple pages. Then you will see the lease. Then behind the lease, you're going to see the disclosures like the bed bugs. Yes, photos, gross, right? And then you will see all the addendums that you possibly could use for this document. Okay, you may not need them all, you may need one, you may need none, but we wanted to make sure it was all in one place for you. It does mention where not to use it. We also know that Oak Park is currently looking at potentially adding their own ordinance. If they approve it, we will definitely keep you in the loop, and I'm sure Carr will too. We're just kind of watching it. But in the meantime, you can use this document for Oak Park, of course. And it's very similar. So again, if you're doing leases in the city of Chicago, you're probably well aware of their ordinance. And honestly, it's the same ordinance, all pretty much. They just changed a couple words, and one is like tenant landlord and one is landlord tenant ordinance. It's so confusing, right? But again, we want to make sure it was available to you. So this contract is not to be used in DuPage and so on and so forth. You need to use the normal Main Street lease for that, for the other suburbs counties. But again, this is now available. So there will be videos next week. We also have videos of the new marketing agreement. Those are done. I believe they're just making some changes. I found some changes, so they took it down off the site and they're refixing it. Then they're going to put it back up. So those 2 videos will be available to you. And those are the changes that we have. I know it's a lot. I'll stop sharing my screen there. If anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Otherwise, I appreciate your time today. It was great.
Thank you, Lynette. That was so informative. I run the compliance. I'm the compliance manager here. I work under Kara, and this is some of the other people on here on the also part of the compliance team. Very informative. Thank you. I'm actually going to get right on top of changing that out in our DocuSign templates so that all of our agents that are members of MORE can start using the right stuff. Thank you.
Yeah, no other questions for me. Does anyone else have any questions? Great. We really appreciate your time today, Lynette. It's very, very helpful. I'm glad that some of our agents popped on, and I know that a lot of them will be watching it later when they're done with their lead generation. Thanks to the compliance team for hopping on here as well. Have a great day, and we look forward to having you back again soon.
Thank you, Kara. Thank you. Have a great day, guys.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.